Okay, we're here in Stuttgart at the conference in October 2013 on the ethics of care, and I'm very happy to be here with Ashley Cole. Could you shortly introduce yourself?
Yes, so my name is Ashley Cole. I am Scottish, but I work in the Netherlands at an American institution called Webster University, which is a small liberal arts college, and I work in the Department of Global Politics. I lecture both undergraduate and graduate students, looking at mainly political theory, but also the discipline of IR. So I look at ideas of gender, politics, human rights, and also ethics is a pulling thread along there, but not explicitly looking at ethics in and of itself.
Okay. You were a participant at the conference. What is your impression?
Well, it was a very nice experience for me because I am usually the care ethicist among social scientists, whereas today and the following days I was an ethicist with ethicists. So the nice thing that I find is that we were able to talk about the same literature, having different interpretations of Gilligan, of Tronto, Seven Henson and so on, but the core principle was that we had read and engaged with these texts in a critical manner, and we're coming to discuss these texts and their implications for each and every discipline that we encountered within the conference itself. So it was refreshing for me, and it also meant that we could get to the root of the issues, the real core of the problematizing about care, the conceptualization of whether it exists or it does not, of care, and also what was very interesting for me was the linguistic problems that we had, how to express ideas of care, and whether or not this was an adequate way of being able to analyse it as well. Also for me, care I use as an analytical lens and not as a practice. So I learned a lot about the ideas of emotion and sensitivity as something which is very relational between one person and another, whereas my analysis is looking more at institutions and organisations. So I, in a sense, take a step back from this explicit humanisation of care, and it was nice to be able to see that I can still engage with, but also critically analyse the ethic of care, which is articulated as a palliative ethic rather than as an analytical lens. So that, for me, are the main things that I'm taking away just now. But also the concepts which weren't really unpacked, but this concept of the everyday. The concept of everyday within international relations literature is very contentious at the moment because it pertains to this idea of the local and grassroots going up to governmental and then to institutional and international. And if we're looking at an ethics of care, it's how this is articulated from a local level, be this a hospital or a school or a social group, and using their diverse and celebrated individual identity, but then transposing this to an international idea of what we mean when we say an ethic of care. So it's been very, the critical manner of the conference is the key thing for me.
Okay. And you mentioned earlier you have a political science background, so you're also somewhat of an outsider maybe.
Yes.
Is there anything you found striking or that particularly or maybe interests you?
Well, my interest was also the community of scholars who were here, and the ability for people to say, actually, well, I don't know about this subject, however, I can comment on this, and a very openness. And usually within many disciplines, you don't want to show your vulnerability. And I don't know if this is just linked to the idea of care, that we are more open to the ideas of vulnerability. That's another debate in and of itself. But it was the fact that we had students, we had PhD students, we had scholars who this has been their work for 20 years, new scholars, and everybody had a voice within there as well. And the fact that students were there and questioning what the relevance of the conference was, why were they there, why were we discussing normative practice that should just happen intrinsically and automatically. And for me, this means that I now, for my students, have to be able to translate what is in my head to make them understand and access all of these concepts that we're unpacking, because it's very easy and it's very pleasurable to have a philosophical debate. But if it doesn't resonate in policy, as a social scientist, I feel that then this idea of theory and practice becomes very, very unsteady, and therefore you don't really give back in terms of knowledge to the discipline itself. So for me, that's something that, as an outsider, I had to try and articulate what insiders were saying. But at a different time, I'm an insider for the ethics of care, and maybe someone who's coming from a palliative background is the outsider as well. So it's articulating, again, going back to some of the themes of the conference, articulating the idea of the other. Time, space, locality, articulation, vulnerability at times. And you could see this throughout the conference, whether it be undergraduate student or a scholar who English isn't their first language. So they have the ideas, but the tool isn't there. So it gives a lot of hope for the ability to transfer all of these skills and knowledge.
Okay, thank you very much.